Hello there. My name is Alan English. The story I am about to read to you is about my ancestor, Sam English. Sam English was a great Scottish football player. He played for Rangers. He was my father's Uncle Sam. This is his story, contained in the book Rangers, Triumphs, Troubles and Traditions, edited by Ronnie, Esplin and Graham Walker. And the chapter, Daddy, Did You Kill a Man?, is by Terence Murray. Daddy, did you kill a man? That question was a dagger in Sam English's heart. It was asked by his daughter, Eleanor, then just 5 years old. The little girl had been approached by a stranger in the park, where she had been playing with her 2 older sisters. It was now 1937. 6 years since the death of John Thompson in that fateful Old Firm encounter, but still English's tormentors would not leave him in peace. They were remorseless, unforgiving, heartless. He heard them only too clearly on the field of play. "Watch the killer, watch the keeper," the crowd would bellow when his team had a corner kick. When he clashed with a player, an opponent would run alongside him and drip poison into his ear. "That'll be another man you have killed." Now they had targeted his little girl. How could anyone stoop so low? In his own little community of Dalmuir, he found nothing but kindness after Thompson's demise. They saw him as one of their own and held him close. His neighbours, Protestant and Catholic, rallied round. The wider world was different. The poison pen letters flooded in, forcing him constantly to relive that afternoon at Ibrox. When he was in Glasgow, he pulled his cap tight over his face, afraid to look anyone in the eye in case they stared back and didn't stop staring. On holiday in Fife, Thompson's home county, he overheard men saying, "That's the laddie that killed Johnny Thompson." For the rest of his life, Sam English asked himself one question: why me? He was not one of the game's hard men, relying instead on guile, skill, and speed. Nor was he a football fanatic, as some players were. Despite his undoubted feelings for Rangers, football was a way of making money, of providing for a young family. There was no question of a grudge against Celtic in general, or John Thompson in particular. That game at Ibrox was his first Old Firm experience, and he had never met or spoken to Thompson. While some Celtic fans offered him only sympathy, he was pilloried when he played at Celtic Park. The first game Rangers played there after the tragedy might have ended in a riot had it not been for the prompt action of his captain, Davy Michaeljohn, who asked the referee to intervene. His father, steeped in the tribal loyalties of Ulster and the Glasgow shipyards, had seen it coming. "Get out of football. Go to America. You will never be allowed to forget it," he told his son. He was right, but Sam English played on, and played to a standard that does him great credit, until he could take no more. So much has been said and written about John Thompson, and rightly so. He was a great player and a true gentleman. But there were 2 victims that day, and Sam English was also a great player and a true gentleman, something that has often been overlooked. After the 5th of September 1931, he found what it was like to live less as a person than one half of an accident. It is time to remember the person. The facts of Sam English's career in football can be found in any number of sources, but they do not tell us how he felt about the hand he was dealt, the agonies he suffered, the persecution he endured. So we are fortunate that eventually he did choose to bare his soul, more than 3 decades after the events that changed his life. It was not an easy decision to make, but at the age of 54, he felt compelled to put the record straight. He had been silent for too long, and in consequence, as he puts it, the Sam English story has been twisted into a kind of hideous folk tale. One generation has warped it and passed it on to the next. So in early 1963, English poured his heart out in the pages of the Scottish Daily Express, then the most influential newspaper in the land. The Express knew there would be a huge interest in his story and gave it a considerable amount of space, spreading the serialisation over 5 days. Sam English was an Ulsterman, born in 1908 in a farm cottage in the hamlet of Crivolia, on the outskirts of the village of Agadowie, itself close to the large town of Coleraine in County Londonderry. He was one of 11 children, of whom 6 were boys and 5 were girls. No doubt finding it hard to make a living on the land, his father uprooted the family and headed to Glasgow, then one of the greatest industrial cities in the world. English Senior found work as a storeman in John Brown's, one of the many shipyards on the banks of the River Clyde, and the family settled in Dalmuir, in the town of Clydebank. Like most of their neighbours, the Englishes struggled to make ends meet. As Sam recalls, there wasn't enough money to buy him and his brothers a proper football or bladder. They made do with tin cans, stones, or when their finances could stretch to it, a tanner bar. Undaunted, he and his brother Dick played football constantly, no matter the weather. Even on the rainiest days, we were off without up to the Somerville Park, often just the 2 of us. On cold, damp grass, we chased and trapped and punted through endless wet afternoons. And in the evenings, our mother often had to call us up from the dutchyard beside the house, still practising. It was perhaps just as well that the young Sam was so dedicated to football, for he was no scholar. His teacher, a Miss Mitchell, used to tell him that all his brains were in his feet. There were other promising players at the school, particularly Neil Dewar, whom his classmates nicknamed Silver Sleeves because he never had a handkerchief, or alternatively, Cleeks, because of his hen toes. He and Sam, united by their exceptional talent, became firm friends. Despite being an occasional figure of fun, Cleeks Dewar, a wonderfully skillful player, would, like his classmate, make it in the professional game. After school, as is often the way, the 2 friends lost touch. But a decade later, Cleeks would come back into Sam's life just when he needed him most. After he left school, Sam English's life was to an even greater extent ruled by football. His first job was as a grocer's boy, but he gave that up because it interfered with Saturday afternoon football. He went to work at Beardmore's shipyard as a plater's boy, a yard he chose for the very simple reason that it had, as he explains, a great team at the time, Dalmuir Albion. Beardmore's was a soccer hothouse, and every lunchtime there would be 3 games going in the yard, helping the young apprentice to hone his skills. English was signed by junior side Old Kilpatrick and received a princely sum of 1 shilling per game before moving on to a new club, Port Glasgow, where, surprisingly in view of what was to follow, he was given a free transfer after just 1 season. Disillusioned, he thought about giving up football and concentrating on his new job as a sheet metal worker at his father's yard, John Brown's. He also loved the bright lights, and by his own admission was more interested in going dancing every night than in the hard slog of training. All that changed when officials from Yoker Athletic appeared at his door one Sunday afternoon. They were keen to sign him, and were not put off by an admonition from his father, who informed his visitors that his son enjoyed a rather hectic social life. "This boy will be no good to you. He's never home any night before midnight." Sam signed a contract, was paid a £3 signing-on fee and £2 a game, of which there were sometimes 3 in a week. It was good money. The average weekly wage for a journeyman at the time was less than £3. 3 great years followed. The junior game was thriving, with big crowds and a high standard of player. Yoker's main rivals were Clydebank Juniors, and games between the 2 clubs often attracted gates in excess of 10,000. In the estimation of Sam English, the standard of play in the juniors was the highest ever reached in Scotland, and better even than continental teams today, that is in 1963. He may have been looking at the past through rose-tinted spectacles, but there is no doubt that he was a sensation in this grade of football. In 3 seasons with Yoker, he averaged around 100 goals per season, and not surprisingly became one of the most sought-after players in Scotland. Scouts from senior teams flocked to watch this goal machine, and one would have signed him but for a dispute between the SFA and the junior game, which meant, among other things, that transfers between the 2 jurisdictions were banned. Despite this, the big clubs courted English assiduously. They reasoned that one day the ban on transfers would be lifted and they would be able to get their hands on the young Ulsterman with dynamite in his boots. The managers did more than just keep a weather eye on Sam English. They filled his pockets with gold. Long before the terms tapping up and bung were coined, the leading British managers were well practised in both. Willie McCartney, manager of Hearts, was a regular visitor to Yoker, slipping Sam a few pounds with a request that the Ulsterman should remember me when the time comes. Other managers did the same. Paddy Travers of Aberdeen, Jack Tinn of Portsmouth, spats and all, Willie Orr of Leicester City. All of them and more besides came to court the young striker nicknamed Blondie due to his unruly thatch of flaxen hair. But there was one manager who did more than the rest to keep Sam English sweet. His name was Bill Struth. The legendary Struth, who brought unparalleled success to Rangers in the interwar years, wasn't about to let another club steal a march on him when the player he was after not only supported Rangers, but also plied his trade just a couple of miles from Ibrox. No doubt worried about Rangers being implicated in making under-the-counter payments, Struth was careful to cover his tracks. For 2 seasons, Sam English received £4 notes in an envelope at his place of work. The money might have been handed over at John Brown's shipyard, but the real paymaster was Rangers Football Club. Sam English felt not a shred of guilt in accepting this money. As he writes in the Express articles, "Their tips, plus my shipyard wages, meant a lot of money coming into our house where nearly all the others were unemployed. I always played football for money, but I know what it means to be short of money. I know what it meant for my mother to be short of it." By the summer of 1931, the rift between the two jurisdictions in Scotland had been healed. Sam English was now free to join a senior club. Rangers were strong favourites for his signature, but the move was almost hijacked at the last minute by the biggest team in the land. Herbert Chapman was the most successful manager England had ever known. He had won 3 league titles in a row with lowly Huddersfield Town in the early 1920s, before being tempted to Highbury, where he would enjoy huge success, turning Arsenal into the establishment club, a team so aristocratic that the royal family is said to support it. So it was that after Yoker's last game of the season, Sam English had 2 invitations, one to meet Chapman, the other to go to Ibrox for signing talks with Bill Struth. Yoker stood to make a lot of money from the transfer if their star centre-forwards chose to move to England. So when the 90 minutes had come and gone, and the crowd had dispersed, Sam English was smuggled out of the little ground and sent in a taxi to St Enoch's Hotel in Glasgow city centre before Rangers could get their hands on him. Herbert Chapman was recovering from a cartilage operation and received his young visitor in his bedroom, got up, as English recalls, in his dressing gown. "I have never seen you play, but everyone else seems to want you, so I might as well join the queue," the great man informed him. The Arsenal Supremo was nothing if not persuasive. He told English that he would do better for himself in London than anywhere else, that opportunities there were unequalled. He boasted about the many audacious transfers Arsenal had been involved in, including the 1928 purchase of David Jack from Bolton Wanderers for £10,340, which not only broke the world record, but also doubled the previous highest fee. Chapman promised to better any offers Rangers made, and when the man from Yoker was still not convinced, virtually offered me, as English vividly remembers, a blank cheque to go to Highbury. For this young man, the streets of London were indeed paved with gold, a tempting prospect for someone who had just got married. But he left the St Enoch Hotel that night without signing for Arsenal, despite the riches on offer. His heart lay elsewhere, at Ibrox Park. It was after midnight when Sam English climbed that famous marble staircase and walked into Bill Struth's office. English recalls that Struth was brisk and businesslike during their meeting. The Rangers boss told him that he was good enough to go straight into the top team at Rangers, the first junior in history to do so. The money was not to be sneezed at either, even if it was less than what Arsenal were offering. His basic wage would be £12 per week, about 6 times what a tradesman earned, with bonuses on top. There was another incentive, a massive signing-on payment of £600, which Struth handed to him in crisp new banknotes. At long last, he was a Ranger. It was a huge step up from Yoker to Rangers, notwithstanding his incredible haul of goals in the junior game. English remembers that reported nervously to Ibrox, where the championship flag was still flying. This was hardly surprising. Rangers had dominated Scottish football since the end of the First World War, winning 10 of the last 12 championships, which included a run of 5 in a row from 1926-27 to 1930-31. The dressing room was full of genuinely great players. Alan Morton, the wee blue devil himself, a Wembley wizard, and someone who, according to English, could put the ball in your hip pocket. Davy Michaeljohn, one of the most redoubtable captains in the history of the Scottish game, and a rock in the centre of defence. Bob McPhail, the record goal scorer at Rangers for 50 years. George Brown, a cultured left half who, like his teammate Morton, would later become a director of the club. And then there was Struth, who was, according to English and almost every observer, an autocratic man. He was the boss. His word was law. If the boy from the Ulster back country was apprehensive, it didn't affect him on the field. He was a sensation from day one, slotting easily into a side that had no discernible weaknesses. His first league match was against Dundee at Ibrox on the 8th of August 1931. It was an unforgettable debut. He carved the Dens Parker's defence open time and again with his lightning pace and scored 2 goals, both with his head. Skillful with the ball at his feet, pacey and direct, outstanding in the air despite not being the tallest, Rangers had unearthed a gem. That debut performance was no flash in the pan. He continued to score freely in the league, notching an astonishing 5 goals at home to Morton and a double away to Ayr United. The goals came from both feet and from his head. The practice sessions with his brother Dick all those years ago in Somerville Park were now paying dividends. After 8 league games, he had 12 goals to his credit. He felt he had earned a jersey for what would be the biggest game of his life, against Celtic at Ibrox on Saturday the 5th of September 1931. It was an experience he almost missed. In a midweek game before the Old Firm clash, he had been kicked on the ankle, leading some newspapers to speculate that Jimmy Smith would take his place in the side. Although he recovered in time, it was a nagging worry in the build-up. He was desperate to face Celtic, desperate to play in the biggest derby in the world. Be careful what you wish for. As he got changed, Sam English was nervous, as nervous as he had ever been in his life. But he wasn't the only one. Even veterans like Davy Michaeljohn and Bob McPhail seemed on edge, while experienced right back Dougie Gray, English recalls, was as jumpy as a cat. That is what the biggest club game on the planet does to players. The young Ulsterman sneaked out of the dressing room to have a look at the crowd, which he remembers looked like a vast tidal wave moving down the terracing. Kick-off approached. It was time to walk into the crucible that was Ibrox Stadium. Perhaps surprisingly, there were no stirring words from Bill Struth. No great oratory. He sent his team onto the pitch that day with a single sentence, which in its simplicity said it all. Well, you know what this means to you. The first half was a disappointment, a scrappy affair, distinguished only by the number of fouls conceded by both sides. Sam English, keen to make his mark, did not have a single shot on goal. He only had one chance when a cross was floated into the box. He jumped, but the Celtic keeper, an inch or so taller, took it off his head. Hard lines, young fellow. The only words ever spoken by John Thompson to Sam English. Half-time came. Something of a relief after a forgettable first period. Then 5 minutes after the restart came the moment that changed the lives of 2 fine young men. Sam English's own words are more eloquent than anything I could write. Jimmy Fleming had the ball, making ground right out on the wing. His cross came over low towards me, just outside the 18-yard line. Both Celtic backs are lying wide. Billy Cook is left of me and behind. I can see McGonigal to my right. He is maybe 6 yards away. I don't know. Anyway, it's too far away for it to matter. There is only the keeper to beat. The ball comes to me from the side. I can see John Thompson moving out of his goal. He hesitates about the 6-yard line to balance himself. He's got the goal mouth completely blocked. There is no bounce on the ball. I can't lift it over his head. But if John Thompson comes out further, I have a chance to go around him. I can run forward faster than he can run back. He does come out. I have a view of 2 feet to a yard of the goal. By now I have pulled the ball round in line with my body using my right foot. I kick it, again with my right, cutting across the front of the ball to try to swerve it in. John Thompson is on me in a rugby tackle. His head thumps into the inside of my left knee. I feel nothing. I fall over him. The ball trickles over the byline, barely rolling. I bend over John Thompson. Billy Cook pulls me back. It wasn't your fault, he says. Cheering swells out from the terracing of Rangers supporters behind the goal. Davy Michael-John runs forward, waving it down. A sudden, heavy silence fills Ibrox. The game continued, with Chick Geetons taking over in goal for the stricken Thompson. No goals are scored. The players' hearts were just not in it. Leaving the pitch, the young Ulsterman learns that John Thompson has been taken to the Victoria Infirmary with a fractured skull. Even a layman knows how serious such an injury could be. Sam was desperate to get home to his family and was given a lift to Dalmuir by Tommy Hamilton, the Rangers' reserve goalkeeper. As he walks out of the dressing room, Davy Michael-John makes a vain attempt to keep his spirits up. "You'll be all right, Blondie," the respected skipper assures him. But Sam English would never be all right again. Later that night, suddenly restless, he had to get out of the house. He went to a billiard hall owned by Tommy Hamilton, which was very close to where he lived. He was deep in conversation with his teammate when a customer came in. It was 11:15. "John Thompson is dead," the man said. "Special papers have been printed." The 2 Rangers players had to confirm it for themselves, and they ran to the nearest phone box. Hamilton rang the hospital, with English squeezed into the box next to him. From what Hamilton was saying, he knew that the unthinkable had happened. On the walk back home, he still could not believe it. Then he heard the cries of the street corner newspaper sellers. "John Thompson, dead. John Thompson, dead." No blame can be attached to Sam English for what happened to Thompson. Billy Cook was the closest player to the incident, and his immediate comment to English that it wasn't his fault is telling. Others who took part in the game took the same view. Jimmy McGrory, the Celtic centre-forward and universally recognised as an honourable man, writes in his autobiography A Lifetime in Paradise, "I can state here and now that not one Celtic player blamed Sam English for what happened. It was an accident." Chick Geetons was the Celtic left half and took over in goals when John Thompson was stretchered off. Years later he expressed his admiration for the Ranger, as well as his sympathy. Sam English was a gentleman footballer as well as a great one. I can assure Sam that from that moment the sympathy of every Celtic player was with him. Newspaper reports led to the same conclusion. Clutha, covering the game for the Evening Times, is unequivocal. "Everyone, I am sure, completely exonerated English of the smallest semblance of blame." There are photographs of the moment when English and Thompson collided, most notably one taken by Jack Gibson of the Scottish Daily Express. It is clear from this image that the collision was the result of 2 highly committed players going for the ball. But the most compelling record of all is on a remarkable piece of newsreel shot by British Movie Tone. It can be viewed on YouTube. The film shows English running in on goal at speed and Thompson advancing towards him. No one who watches it can come to any other conclusion about the accidental nature of the incident. The footage is equally telling about the aftermath. When English gets up, his instinctive reaction is to check on Thompson's injury. Seconds later, he gestures to the bench for assistance. These are the actions of a man whose first concern was for the welfare of a fellow professional. If Sam English's conduct was impeccable, so too was that of Rangers Football Club. Bill Struth insisted on sending a car to Thompson's hometown of Cardington, Fife, to collect his parents and bring them to Glasgow. Michael John, Struth's on-field lieutenant, as we have seen, silenced those Rangers fans who began to cheer when Thompson collapsed. Rangers and their players, as shocked as anyone in Glasgow about the tragedy, were to the fore as obsequies were observed. On the Tuesday after the game, a memorial service for Thompson was held in the Trinity Congregational Church near Charing Cross. The idea for the service came from the church's minister, Reverend H.S. McClelland. A keen football man, he had been at the game and had witnessed what happened. Glasgow, as warm-hearted as ever, came out to pay its respects to the courageous young man from Fife. Accounts vary, but it is estimated that upwards of 3,000 crowded into West Claremont Street, hoping to gain entry to the service. Many were disappointed, so many that another service was put on immediately after the first one. Every Rangers player who had taken part in the match was present, while Michael John read one of the lessons. For his part, Sam English got a foretaste of the life that was to come. As he squeezed through the huge crowd, every eye was upon him. "But he's only a boy," one woman exclaimed. English would later say that she sounded almost disappointed, somehow wanting him to be older. The service was an ordeal for the young man from Crivolia. When the first organ note of "Nearer, My God, to Thee" was played, Sam began to weep, and did not stop weeping until he left the church. It was the same at John Thompson's funeral, held on Wednesday the 9th of September in Bow Hill Cemetery, near to Cardington. If the service in Glasgow had been well attended, it was as nothing compared to the turnout in Fife. 3 special trains carrying 2,000 mourners left Glasgow's central station for the east. Many men, impoverished due to the dire economic circumstances of the early 1930s, were unable to afford the bus or train fare. So they walked to Fife, camping out in the hills of Auchenderrin that night before attending the funeral. The next day they trooped home, completing a journey that for some was 100 miles or more. It is said that 30,000 were in and around the cemetery, including the great and good of Scottish football. Those who could not be there sent wreaths, so many that a lorry was needed to carry them. In that mighty throng were 21 men who had played at Ibrox on the Saturday, among them Sam English. He could have stayed away. He had ready-made excuses, as his presence might well have detracted from the solemnity of the occasion, or even worse, led to an outbreak of violence. But it never crossed his mind not to attend. He had to be there. It was his duty. English remembers walking alone in the cemetery before teammate Alan Morton pushed his way through the crowds to be at his side. Just to be on the safe side, the police crowded around the 2 Rangers, forming a thick cordon. 5 weeks after John Thompson was laid to rest, official Scotland gave its verdict. A fatal accident inquiry was convened in Glasgow on the 15th of October 1931. Although the police investigations into what had happened at Ibrox pointed strongly to accidental death, the inquiry was nevertheless a legal requirement. Witnesses were summoned, including the referee, the 2 club managers, Dr. Colishan, the Celtic club doctor, a press photographer, and Sam English himself, although he was not called to give evidence. The referee and Dr. Colishan both testified that the incident was accidental, as did others summoned to the stand. Sheriff Wilton, presiding, was in no doubt, nor was the jury, among whom there were no dissenting voices. The finding was that the cause of death was fracture of skull sustained by accidental injury while playing football. That is a fact. But there was one verdict that meant more to Sam English than any other. That of the Thompson family, and in particular John's mother. Many have commented on the similarities between Sam and John. Both were young men who had escaped the drudgery of a life in Scotland's traditional heavy industries. Both were from a Northern Irish background, Thompson on his mother's side. Both were Protestants. Both were from large families, English being one of 11 siblings, Thompson one of 5. Both had distinguished themselves on the field of play at an early age. Thompson being capped for Scotland at the age of 21, very young for a goalkeeper. But most of all, both men were very close to their mothers, using their earnings from football to make life easier for the most important women in their lives. Under different circumstances, the two families would have been friends or neighbours. So it must have been a great comfort to Sam when he learnt that the Thompson family had asked local newspapers in Fife to carry a special article. Headed "A Message from Bow Hill," it was printed in several papers and reads, "The parents of John Thompson have made a request to us to publicly announce that they entirely exonerate the Rangers centre-forward Sam English of any responsibility for the accident which resulted in their son's death. They realised that it was an accident, pure and simple. The family also wish to express their gratitude for the uniform sympathy that has been extended to them from people all over the land." English was invited to the Thompson home a week after the funeral. He remembered shaking hands with the family and then visiting the grave with John's father. Even in the midst of a terrible bereavement, the Thompsons were anxious to reach out to a man they knew must be suffering. It was a truly Christian gesture. Sam English always treasured the letter he got from John's mother on the 3rd anniversary of his death. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. English, received the beautiful floral tribute that you sent in memory of our beloved son John. His resting place was lovely with all the wreaths. The Celtic company was here with their tributes also. Our hearts are sad at this time, but nothing can bring our dear one back again. I hope you are well as this leaves us. With kind regards, yours sincerely, Mrs. Thompson." In 1963, the Express, as part of its serialisation, arranged for John Thompson's brother, Jim, to meet Sam, and during their meeting, Jim confirmed how the Thompsons felt. "I never blamed you for what happened, Sam. Neither did my mother. Even when she was at her lowest, she spared a thought for you. I'm sorry you have been so troubled." Jim Thompson's sentiments were typical of how decent, fair-minded people felt. In fact, everyone with a close connection to what happened was satisfied that it was an accident, except, that is, for Celtic manager Willie Malley. Willie Malley's leading role in the development of Celtic and more broadly of Scottish football is undeniable. He was a distinguished player and administrator with the Parkhead club, and he won 16 league titles and 14 Scottish Cups in 4 decades as Celtic manager. For these achievements he deserves to be bracketed with Struth, Stein, Smith and Ferguson. But after the death of his star goalkeeper, Malley did more than anyone else to keep the bitterness going. Quite simply, his conduct was disgraceful. At the fatal accident inquiry, he was asked if he thought Thompson's death was an accident. "Well, I hope it was an accident. I cannot form any opinion as to what happened, as I did not actually see the accident," he replied. Sam English always felt that what Malley had said at the fatal accident inquiry was not only deeply unfair, but was also responsible for many of the on and off field problems he would endure. 30 years on from the accident, he was still baffled and hurt by Malley's actions, as he points out in his articles for the Express. "I still cannot imagine why William Malley, the Celtic manager, said what he said that day." It is often asserted by modern-day journalists that after the accident, Sam English was never the same player again. They are correct. He was even better than before. It might also be assumed that having been through such a trauma, he would be sidelined by Rangers for weeks, perhaps even months, before being allowed to set foot on a football pitch. In fact, Sam English played the day after Thompson's funeral, on Thursday the 10th of September 1931, and scored a wonder goal. There was a home game against 3rd Lanark scheduled for that night in the Glasgow Charities Cup, a competition that clubs at the time took very seriously. English did not expect to be selected. His family also thought that he would be given leave of absence, with his mother making the heartfelt comment, "Surely they'll not ask you to turn out today." The newspapers too were blindsided, among them the Daily Record, which informed its readers that the Rangers team would be minus English, noting that Jamie Smith leads the attack. So when the young Ulsterman arrived at Ibrox, he fully expected to be sitting in the stand. His manager had other ideas. I remember the dull shock of getting to the stadium to find that Mr. Struth had listed me to play, he later recalled. The manager's explanation was that Smith had a heavy cold. But was this a ruse on Struth's part to ease English back into the side without giving him time to brood? It is doubtful if English was in the right frame of mind. In fact, he even thought of refusing to play, but with a disciplinarian like Bill Struth, that was a Rubicon he dared not cross. Keep your eye on the ball, and remember you are playing football, the manager advised him, in a gruff yet somehow kindly tone. And play football he did, scoring what the record describes as a beautiful goal, a bit of quick thinking and coolness in the 4-1 victory. He was helped by a chance reunion with someone from his school days. The third Lanark centre forward was none other than Neil Creeks-Dewar, and his presence was crucial. I ran out to him in the centre circle. We shook hands. We said just the usual things about how long it had been since we met, but the relief of having an old friend on the field helped me through that first game. From that day on, English's form was exceptional. While he failed to score in the next league game against Partick Thistle, several papers noted that his overall performance was excellent. Normal service was soon resumed. He notched a brace in a 6-1 rout of Cowdenbeath on the 3rd of October and a hat-trick against Dundee United on the last day of that month. By the season's end, he had added another 4 hat-tricks, including 4 goals in a match against Queen's Park in February 1932. He finished up with 44 league goals for the season, a Rangers record, and one that endures to this day. English was no less prolific in the Scottish Cup, scoring a further 2 hat-tricks and a double. Rangers advanced to the final, where they met Kilmarnock, and after a first match that was drawn, the teams returned to Hampton for the replay. In front of a record crowd for a midweek game of 105,000, Rangers ran out easy winners by 3-0, with Sam English, despite sustaining a bad head knock, scoring the third. 56 goals in all competitions and a Scottish Cup medal. Surely no other Ranger in history has achieved so much in his first season. If his second season in light blue was not quite so glorious, it was nothing to be sneezed at. He got 10 league goals in 25 games, 22 in all competitions, as Rangers powered to a 6th title in 7 years. After another productive season, with a championship medal in his pocket, Sam English left for his summer holidays in Girvan in fine fettle. So it must have been a shock when he was summoned back to Ibrox in the middle of his vacation to meet Bill Struth. The manager bluntly informed him that his time at Ibrox was up and that he was being moved on, as English recalls in the Express articles. Liverpool had made an offer and I would be transferred. Some of the edge had gone off my game. Goals came less readily. The heart had gone out of me. English did not want to leave Ibrox. He loved it there. Indeed, when Struth told him that Rangers had accepted Liverpool's offer, his first thought was that he might as well give up the game. But he decided to go to Anfield, persuaded by Liverpool's manager George Patterson that he would find it different there. We shall never know for sure what Struth's reasons were for transferring English. On face value, it was done for football reasons, but the continuing vitriol from Celtic fans, the despicable comments of Malley, and the abuse the young striker had to face in his daily life may well have played a part in his decision. There is also the possibility that Struth thought he was doing English a favour, allowing him to make a fresh start away from the bitter enmities of Glasgow. At Anfield, his performances were highly creditable. He scored 26 goals in 50 appearances for the Reds, including one in the derby against Everton. But when his form shaded in his second season on Merseyside, he was sold to Queen of the South for £1,700, a huge sum for a club that is small even by provincial standards. The English signing was one of the biggest things ever to happen to Queens, with local paper, the Dumfries and Galloway Standard, describing the new man as a real big name in Scottish football. Such was the excitement generated by the capture that 11,000 rolled up to Palmerston Park for the season opener against Hibs. In the early part of his time at the Doonhamers, Sam English performed admirably, and one game in particular must have given him great satisfaction. In mid-September 1935 he faced Celtic at Palmerston and scored an excellent goal, although it didn't prevent Queens going down by 3-1. Then in November 1935 came the fixture he must have been anticipating most of all, at home to Rangers. If English had mixed feelings about facing his old club, it was not evident on the field. The Standard of the 13th of November 1935 describes his play as delightful and notes that English continues to improve, and his bustling methods had Simpson and his backs in a quandary and glad to pass back to Dawson for relief. It was not to last. His performances, whether through injury or loss of form, began to deteriorate. The Standard was quick to criticise, using words like feeble and failed to sum up his displays. He was moved from centre forward to the right wing, and when that did not improve matters, he was left out of the team altogether. He neither played in the return league fixture at Celtic Park in January 1936, nor in the away game with Rangers in April of the same year. On the 22nd of April 1936, the Standard reported that Sam English was on the transfer list and available for a fee of £1,000. In May 1936, with Queens unable to find a buyer, English was given a free transfer and joined Hartlepool United, a lowly team in his view. Once again, his early performances were of a very high standard. In his first season, he scored 18 league goals in 34 starts. His second campaign was not so successful, with a return of 9 goals in 35 league matches. By this time, he had become disillusioned with football. He was tired of the snide remarks from opponents, the taunts from sections of opposition supporters, and the stream of poison pen letters. In the end, the never-ending abuse simply wore him out. So aged 28, he retired after, as he describes it, 7 years of joyless sport. Today, thanks largely to the efforts of Rangers fans, a process is underway to restore Sam English to his rightful place in the pantheon of Ibrox greats. He has always been a fan's favourite, as a song written in his honour, the Ballad of Sam English, clearly illustrates. It notes English's Protestant and Ulster roots, and encourages Rangers fans to sing Derry's Walls when he scores a goal. It is also, incidentally, very complimentary about John Thompson. But it was the centenary of Sam English's birth on the 18th of August 2008 that became the focal point. Rangers Supporters Trust, thanks to a considerable fundraising effort by its members, commissioned silversmith Cara Murphy to make the Sam English Bowl, a piece of solid silver containing 44 silver balls, which is presented each year to the top scorer at Ibrox. Then in February 2009, members of the English family were invited to a civic reception by Coleraine Borough Council, at which the two plaques in his memory were unveiled at the family home in Crevolia. Rangers Football Club belatedly recognised the former player when Sam English was inducted into the Hall of Fame at Ibrox. After his playing career had drawn to a close, English had spells as a coach with Dundalk, Hibernians and Yoker Athletic, before he again found work as a sheet metal worker in John Brown's shipyard. In those years, he and his wife Sadie lived in a 4-room house in Dalmuir, where, to keep out of her hair, he became a keen gardener. It took a long time, but in the late 1950s, he started to venture out to football again, initially at Firhill, and then, as he explains, thanks to director George Brown and manager Scott Simon, at the place he loved above all others, Ibrox. He relished his trips to watch Rangers, despite it still being some kind of grisly peep show. Sam English gave his interviews to the Express in 1963, and sometime thereafter he contracted the deadly motor neurone disease. He died in the Vale of Leven Hospital in 1967 at the age of 58. It was no doubt some kind of release from the whispered asides and furtive glances that followed him wherever he went. But no matter what fate threw at him, he never retreated into bitterness or self-pity. Most of all, he kept a place in his heart for the young man whose death he would have done anything to avoid. People, trying to be kind, would often say to him, "You are the unluckiest player in Scotland." "Not the unluckiest," Sam would reply. "The second unluckiest." That was the story of Sam English, an Ulsterman my ancestor, and a great Scottish football player. This is his story. Thank you for listening.